Let me just get the correct presentation as well.
Okay, I'll send the link to the application form in the chat in the meantime. But that's not what Gerard will discuss. That's when I present.
Okay, thanks for sorry guys, just sorting out some hardware.
Gerard, are you ready? Or alternatively, I can go through the application form. Do you just want to utilize the time effectively?
Yeah, can you see my screen?
I can.
Okay, let's continue.
Good, thank you.
Okay, so as we said this morning, we put the box there. Now we are going to start with the processes. And this afternoon, we've got the first 3 processes. Now, the first one that Fora is quite eager to show you is on the first step, the application form. Okay, so just on an overview again, we want to go from the application all the way to commercial operation. And we're going through those steps. This is for the distributor, and it gives just an overview of the customer processes. So I've got a type of a flow chart here, which actually describes the entire set of processes. So we start here with the application, and the customer should at that stage receive an information pack that we will discuss just now. Once the customer has done the application, it goes back to the distributor, who will evaluate this application and the impact on the network, whereafter a quotation will be issued. And that's basically the steps 2 and 3. Once the customer accepts that, he can go through with the next set of steps. So there's the design and the regulatory processes. And the same goes for the distributor as well, where they might also have design if there's any network strengthening that's required. And of course, for instance, for a new line, there might also be rights of way to be acquired, environmental impact assessments, etc. So this whole block here, you can see actually encompasses everything of the grid code compliance. So you will see that the design is already included in the grid code compliance bigger block. Now, Mark, I think we have to consider whether this letter of consent is still required, because that is for the registration with NERSA. That was required. NERSA needed some proof that the IPP or the generator has spoken to his distributor and has consent to actually connect to the network, and that those impacts have been checked. There's also other regulatory requirements. Then we get to construction for both parties and commissioning, and of course the testing for the generator specifically to make sure that it meets the requirements that were set, both from the distributor as well as from the grid code. And then after all of this testing, can they prove their grid code compliance with the final set of tests that actually prove the grid code compliance. Once this has been completed, you get to the commercial operation. In the background, you will see there's another see-through block that speaks of agreements. And agreements can include
Hello, Gerard.
yes.
So I don't know if
Sorry
it was
about that.
just with me, but you went away. The last part I heard was that agreements could include.
Okay, thank you. Let me just get my train of thought there, sorry. So the agreements can include different parties. It's not always just between the distributor and the customer, but there might be other parties. So for instance, with a wheeling agreement, that can be other customers, or also with wheeling type of arrangements, there can be agreements with other municipalities, for instance, or other distributors. There can be agreements with government, for instance, a REAP program. So there's a whole host, and that's why it's included here, spanning all of these swim lanes. And you can see this also starts before the design can be finalized, that these have to be at least agreed on. So for you to, this is still on an overview, for you to assess the network, we've spoken now about grid impact studies, but ideally, one would actually look at long-term planning, just like you do your long-term forecasting and planning for network expansion. One should also now consider the generators. And we'll see just now what happens there. There still is your detailed grid impact studies. So even if you've done, you may still want to look at a specific case and whether that's going to remain within spec. But typically from this master planning, you will get your hosting capacity. I thought I'll just add in a nice picture. This comes from an online, there's a resource there where they did a hosting capacity study in America. And you can see that in this case, the red says there is the hosting capacity is less than, for instance, 300. I think this is, yes, it's kilowatts. And then up to the blue parts, there's quite a lot of capacity left. So either there are two options. This is just because the lines are longer here where it's red, and you can't connect as much because the misery of Ohm's law. And here where you are closer to maybe other generation sources, you can connect a lot more generation. I don't think this includes a lot of existing generation, so this would just tell you, but this is what the network can accommodate. And you'll see just now why I spoke of that again. So we've discussed this morning. I don't want to go through it in detail again. So the first step, of course, is the application. Now, given that in the past, generators had to be licensed unless they were smaller than 100 kilowatts or similar, I think the perception was that people almost had to start at NERSA, but that is not required. That can be directly with the distributor. And that's also contained in the grid code, and with that, how the communication should flow. So once your customer comes to you and says, but I'm interested in doing this, you can hand him the information pack, which will include the application form as well as an application fee. So there should be an invoice for the application fee. From this, okay, this information pack needs to include a few documents. We'll look at that just now. And then the customer can go back home and say, well, okay, will I be able to meet these requirements? And secondly, am I prepared to pay these fees? So for instance, we've got here the estimates of application fees from the Eskom application form. So you can see that, yeah, for the just above 1 megawatt to about 10 megawatt, it's not a massive application fee. And then for quite large installations, it does go up quite a bit. Then they have separate fees for if you downgrade your either the notified maximum demand or the maximum export capacity. And this is all, okay, so we've said that they have two processes, or the cost estimate letter and the budget quote. We can discuss that again later. This is just for that first stage. So there are two things. The one is that it prevents unnecessary applications. You don't want everybody to flood you with a lot of applications just because they think it's going to be a good idea. So especially if you come to slightly larger ones, over 100,000, well, at that stage, they should have a lot of backing. But you don't want them to just say, okay, let's keep the distributor busy. Let's see if they have something to do with their hands. They actually will have to be serious about this. And this is, in principle, to pay for your time to actually do that evaluation. So what else should go into that application pack? The application form, the application fee, and then the general information. So, for instance, what is your process? So if you don't have a process, the guideline that we've shared is a good starting point so that the customer has a good idea of what to expect and what the processes would be. Then there would be the connection and use of system agreement. That's the standard connection agreement. But especially for generators and larger generators, there are a few extra requirements to put into that agreement. We'll get to that, I think, tomorrow afternoon. If the customer wants to do self-build, there should be the self-build agreement, which should state at the very least that they must meet your technical requirements. You will do the sign-off, things like that.
Sorry, Gerard, could you maybe
Yes.
just quickly explain what self-build entails? I know we discuss it a lot, but it might be new for some.
Thank you, Fora. So self-build means that, let's assume you've identified that you need a 2-kilometer 66 kV line and a new transformer to be able to connect this customer. They can elect, and that was obviously started from the Eskom side, mostly because they didn't have capacity to do these projects. So what the customer then does is say, but okay, instead of paying you to do the final design and actually procure the construction, procure the equipment, procure the construction, and all of that, we will do it because we've got teams who can do a lot of this work very quickly. So the customer says, well, I'm going to build your infrastructure. And ownership actually transfers to the distributor once it's signed off by the distributor. Is that clear to everybody? Especially those who didn't know before. Okay, was that Dan just to say yes, or was that for a question?
Seems clear. Thank you, Gerard.
Okay, thank you. So wheeling agreement, well, that is when your customer is relatively far away from where the generator is, and you are going to use your distributor's network to get the electricity from where it's generated to the end customer who pays for it. Then it's a good idea to include the distribution network code and the renewable power plant code. Then other applicable technical, legal, financial, and operational agreements that you need to go and look at what are your requirements. And if you are not sure that your requirements are met in the previous documents, once again, we have the support desk, so contact us and let's discuss what you think you might need extra. The applicable tariff structures. So how are you going to A, charge him for using the network, and B, refund him for any electricity generated? Then basic information on the grid impact study. And that document is being updated. The grid code compliance requirements, that is from NERSA. And the last one, the policy regarding the reservation of hosting capacity on the network. So maybe the hosting part here as well. In essence, what that means is your network now acts as the host of both customers and generators. And as we've said, even with the small scale generators, you know what you design for, how much load can be connected. In that same network, how much generation can it accommodate? And that's what the hosting means. The hosting capacity would mean that, let's say, for instance, a simple
You've gone again, Gerard.
Yes, same situation here.
Okay, so sorry about that. I thought I had a location with good internet now, but apparently it's not good at all. This one should be better now. All right, so hosting capacity, let's say the 10 megawatt transformer. Let's say you do not go up to full capacity on your transformer. Let's say 80% loading, and you've already got a 5 megawatt generator there. It means you can connect another 3. If you have a 3 megawatt application, but that customer is only early in the stages, you're not going to allocate that necessarily, even if you apply it first. There might be another customer who comes in and says, but I'm really in a hurry. I know I've got this 2 megawatt plant that I want to build and it's going to go quick. If he follows the process quicker, then he might take 2 of that 3 megawatts that was available. And even though the other customer applied first, you might have to then wait for an upgrade of the network or similar. And that's basically the allocation of or reservation of hosting capacity. Because so that's it. And the first step is really easy. And on the checklist, all that we at this point check is, did the customer, did he receive the full information pack and forms? Did he complete the application form? And did he pay for the application form? That is all that you need in the very first stages. So any questions or comments right now?
Becky's got his hand up first.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Botha. The question is actually more on the hosting capacity, but it would help if the doctor does not mind to go to the flowing chart. I've got a reason for that, if the doctor does not mind.
Yes.
The flow chart, that flow chart of blocks there. Yes, just here. If you, it's okay. It's common course application, evaluation, quotation, and accept. That is where the problem is, Doc, because once you give the quotation, you evaluate first, or because once you give the quotation after you have evaluated, that means you have undergone some work. Therefore, he might not pay. Why can't we put the quotation before you evaluate, so that even if you reject, remember I use the reject very loosely. We don't reject, but even if you reject what he's proposing with an advice, maybe to say do like this, then he does that. Because once you give them, once you evaluate and you give quotation, and also now I'm going to the hosting part. Also, when somebody has paid, and now you tell him that, hey, Buddha, your 3, you wanted 3, your 2 has been taken by that person who wanted to do fast, and he has already paid. That might be a problem. And also, while you're doing this, you also triggered something while you put this on the screen. Are these values the values that you maybe are suggested, maybe you are trying to sell to us to use these values, these amounts? Because
okay, you're asking
okay,
a lot of questions, Peggy. Let's take them one at a time.
Okay.
Okay, so what I wanted to show here is this is the application fee. So that's before you do any work. He has to pay a certain amount. So that covers, and later this afternoon, we're going to look at the evaluation and the quote parts. So he's already paid something before you even start this. And from this comes the quotation, either the cost estimate or the budget quote, and that we'll probably discuss it more tomorrow morning when we have our guest as well. But then he gets another quotation, and when he accepts it, he has to pay something before he can go to the next stage. So that those are like gateways. That's a proposal. Whether I say that you should use these values, no, I'm not saying that. You should consider what is applicable in your scenario and what is feasible. What is going to allow enough customers to still apply without the, let me say, the kansvatters. What would be a good English word for that?
Chances.
That they don't, just chances, yeah. So that the chances just don't come in and waste your time. And also maybe a note that Eskom does subtract these values from the end. So let's say at the end they give you a budget quote, then they say, okay, but you've already paid this 100,000, we can subtract that. So you pay for the full process at the end, the full price, but you pay in stages as you go along. Then on that hosting capacity, let's leave that for a little bit later. I hear your concern, and I know that can result in a big debate, and we've got, you know, I think we can see both sides of it. Is that okay?
I'm covered. Thank you, Dr. Botha.
Okay, if you have another question, we can go to it. I just wanted to take them one at a time. Otherwise, we forget what the first one was.
You see, people who are clever like you've answered even the question that I wanted to ask. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thanks, Becky. I think Leon also had a hand up.
Okay, firstly, there's quotation fees work for municipality that be determined by the mayor or whoever's in charge of that. So I'm not too worried about it. What I'm worried about is the information package. I'm going to just tell you, I've got 32 years service or with the municipality, so I know clients quite well. Providing them with the information package and you leave something out. Now, believe me, if the client outside there makes a mistake, he tells his client the municipality has made the mistake. So if you give them an information package and you only include those documents as you lay down, and something is against the OS Act, he would say, yeah, but this is the only thing that the municipality gave us. So the clients are very, very likely to turn around and blame everything on the municipality. So information package, I'm not too sure about it. I would rather say put all the information on the website and tell the consultant anything. Go to the website, get all the information there. So you can't turn around and say, listen, I didn't receive this document, or I didn't receive the wiring code of premises, or I didn't receive this. Believe me, it happens. I have, as I said, 32 years experience with clients, and especially consultants, which don't perform their work that they should do, and then at the end of the day, they're looking for a scapegoat. And you are also talking about application form. I see your application form here, but what about a drawing? I mean, how can you really evaluate the application without a schematic drawing? That is my comments.
Thank you, Leon. That is very useful input. But I think on that note, it's good to hand over to Fora to go through that application form.
Sure, thank you, Gerard. There's also a few questions in the chat, but Leon, yeah, noted in terms of the fashion or the approach of making the information available. I hear what you're saying. That makes sense. So that's good. Just the questions in the chat. So Shiraz also just saying, shouldn't the application fee also be reflected on the chart? Just for clarity. And I think that's the confusion. And to be honest, Shiraz, this was even a confusion for us when we looked at the guideline for the first time, because normally there would be one quote, there would be one fee, and then you're done. So I can understand where that's coming from, but there is a difference between an application fee versus a quotation or budget quotation, for you to do upgrades on the network or changes. So, but well noted. And then just saying that the application process for consumers is the application process for consumers who wants to install embedded generators. And then what about IPPs? Will they also have to pay these fees? Gerard, you can actually confirm, but as far as I know, the IPPs pay a lot of money to bid, and I would foresee paying also money for a type of an application as well, but you could confirm that.
Yes. Okay. In your networks, remember the definition of an embedded generator is a generator that's connected on a distribution network. In my mind, it should be the generator behind the meter, but it isn't. It's wider than that. The IPPs, if you have the same size range, Eskom would charge them the same thing. The other application fees with the REAP program, there's guarantees that gets paid to government just to take part in that procurement program. So yes, there are lots of fees that are paid, and yes, I wouldn't distinguish between a customer who wants to add a generator to his existing load, or a customer who says, but I've got this piece of property where I can install a PV system, let me do that even though I don't have any load on there. The application should actually be the same. That's part of being fair and equitable access to the network. I would like to go back to Shiraz's question, and that probably goes back to this morning's discussion on this, the number of steps. The flowchart contains only the high-level information, and you will see as I continue with the presentation that we've got sub-flowcharts that goes into details for the different steps. So one could say you want to include everything, and I'm usually guilty of including too much, but you have to draw a line at some point and just basically give the steps and give the customer an idea of what the process is, and then go into the detail of each step. Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gerard. And then, Leon, your point regarding the single line diagram, I think once I've presented or went through the application form, we can talk about that again. It might be that we address that. So let's have a look. Gerard, could you confirm if you could see the screen? Or someone?
Yes, I can see.
Thank you, Gerard. Okay, so guys, this is the full application form, one pager, if only. Right, so I'm just going to go through the titles again so that we can see the body of the document, and then I'll open each of these sections and then we'll go through the meat. My intention is just to highlight the key areas which would be new compared to processing SCCG applications. I mean, you understand what it entails to put in account details and put in the embedded generated details and so on. So what's new, what's different? And that's the sections I would like to discuss. So I'm not going to repeat what's as a standard there. You know, like Gerard started, let me switch on my camera. Like Gerard started this morning to say it's quite similar. There's just a few differences. I want to focus on those differences. And then Mark, if there's something that I've missed, please stop me. And then we'll take it from there. Okay, so the general document form, we've got the general information, which has a little bit of background and tells you a bit more about, you know, where this is applicable and what the basic steps would be and how the application would fit in the whole process. Then there's a summary of the application and the project implementation process. There's a generator overview information. So that's the embedded generator overview, a lot of information there. Applicant and property information, very similar to the SCCG form. There's a construction schedule, very short section, just so that you know planning-wise when they plan to install and commission. Details on the existing connection, the embedded generator technical detail information. Sorry, I think I'm confusing these two with each other. I think that's the one that's a little bit more detailed. We'll see it just now. And then we've got the regulatory requirements and standards. So it's just a table listing of all the relevant requirements, standards, and specifications that this unit needs to adhere to if they're going to apply for it. And then just a declaration at the end in terms of having access to the information and that everything is above board. So let's start with the first one. So under the general information, you'll see that it makes it very clear that this is an application form for 1 megawatt and larger. We want to make that clear because anything below 1 megawatt, people tend to deal with as SCCG. You know, 999.99 is still less than 1 meg. So as soon as if it's a megawatt or larger, then this form is applicable. Okay, so so let's look at the rest. So you'll see it's applicable to all generator power sources. So it's not just solar PV. 1 meg and larger. It can be for generators with or without self-consumption. And it could be for generators intending to wheel power. And it's also all customer categories. So it's not just limited to commercial or industrial. So it's quite open in terms of what it can be used for. This is not an application form for systems less than a megawatt. or obviously for generators in ESCOM network areas, as well as off-grid generators. So that's not obviously where there's no point of supply and there's no connection to the grid, so it's totally operating off-grid, then you would not use this form. Okay, right. So there's just stipulating that if it's less than 1 meg, they should use the SCG application form. And then I think this is something that we've picked up, which is quite an important concept, is that whoever fills in this form really needs to be familiar with the technical details to do it. Now, Mark and I had a discussion about maybe we should require PRNG, to fill this in and to give their details up front, because there are some engineering concepts which, a standard admin person won't know. So, but we haven't defined that as a requirement as of yet. That's just an idea of adding that. But the bottom line is whoever fills in this form needs to know what they're filling in, because you don't want to be in a situation where you evaluate based on the information that was provided, and then afterwards when the engineer comes on board, they start to make changes, and it totally changes the what's been proposed or applied for. Okay, so that's quite important. Now, just to point out, there's two main parts of the application process, prior to the implementation or the permission, and that's now what Gerard was talking about now, in terms of they have to submit the application, there'll be a quote that they need to pay and agree upon, and all of these things need to happen, before they can go into implementation phase and commissioning phase. And I think it's important that they know this, because we know of a lot of developers installing, and then after the fact they want to go through this process, which makes it very difficult. Let's just quickly check. Yeah, so if there's no electrical connection or they want to increase, then they have to go through the standard processes for increasing their connection size, if that's a requirement. And then the fees and the cost estimate, you need to provide based on what you've looked into. So you can see it's just giving a little bit of context and explaining to the developer how this thing is going to work. Now, if we look at the summary of the application, here's that the steps that you go through, which you guys applied as well. So it just repeats it here so that they are on the same page as you. If we go to the generator overview information, okay, so this is now the information about the new plant that you're going to install. So there's a project name with a date of when you plan to install it. Then the question is what, by the way, we've tweaked this document already, so there's 1 or 2 edits we've made as well. So if there's any suggestions, please let us know so that we can improve the document. So, so you're going to indicate this, okay, well, what is the capacity of the new generator? Now, it could be that there's nothing. It could be that it's something that you add. So, and then afterwards, if you say, okay, well, if I'm extending an existing generator, you need to say what is my existing capacity. So it might be that you've installed 700 kilowatt. Now you're planning to install another 700, so it becomes 1.4, and then you will indicate, okay, it's going to be 1.4 megawatt if we add the 2. So yeah, so you use that one if it's a new generator, so there's nothing there. It will only be let's say it's a brand new installation, you're going to install 2 megawatts, you use that one. If you're going to expand, you use the second row. If not, you just indicate, not applicable. I'm not expanding, I'm installing a new system. Thank you, Shiraz. No, I'm noting the comments in the section, so thank you for that. Okay, so let's continue. So there you need to indicate what's the system type, if it's PV or something else. Indicate what, is it going to export power? Is it going to limit the export power, or, or everything's going to be exported? Very similar to the SCG form. And I think this is this in addition to the operation philosophy. It's giving a short description of, okay, what is this project? What does it entail? How's it going to work? Because it's now not just a grid-tied system slapped on the roof. It's a little bit broader than that. So it's good that they give that information about the site and the details of the site, and then any land use permission that's required also needs to be indicated here. Okay, so that's all in terms of the generator. Let's look at the applicant and property information. Again, very similar to the SCG application form. You've got the account holder details, you've got the applicant details. And one of the points I actually mentioned to Mark is we might want to consider or see if we could include like a proxy clause, which means that the person that fills in the application, and when the account holder signs that section, it will allow that person to apply and process it on their behalf, because typically the proxy is happening separately. If there's a few legal guys on the online that has an opinion about that, that would be great, but that's just an idea. But for now, they need to submit that information as a minimum. Construction schedule, very short, just indicating the anticipated construction start date and when they would like to commission. Just see what is the rest. I'm just checking the feedback there as well. And then the existing connection. Obviously, you need to know what's the connection point. I think if you obviously look at the account, you'll pick that up from your own, from your own database. But just to ease the application, they confirm and provide that information. And here's a little bit more meat, and this is where it becomes a little bit different compared to an SCG form. So the first thing is, what is the voltage of the generator connection into the customer's network? So you need to indicate, just want to quickly make sure. Yeah, so this is obviously the voltage of the generator itself. At what voltage? Is it going to be 400 volts? Is it going to be at an MV voltage? So you need to indicate that, and then you also need to indicate what's the estimated fault contribution. So that will obviously be the existing fault current or fault conditions, and add it with the fault current contribution coming from the new generator. And it's these type of questions that you cannot just have I want to say a random admin person to fill in. You will need some form of professional person or someone with a technical background to fill this in. You'll see even with other parameters that's the same. Okay, so if we look at the embedded generator specifications, so if it's not applicable, you can obviously just indicate, not applicable or NA. Who's the manufacturer? What's the energy source? Is it solar, wind, or fuel? What's the MVA size of the inverter of the generator? The megawatt. So we've got the parent power and the active power. If you're going to install solar, what's the megawatt peak that you're going to install on the solar side? The rated AC voltage, the maximum expected voltage on the DC side, the rated power factor. So we know for inverters, it's typically set to 1. I'm actually even thinking that will come with the grid code to talk about the power factor range, because it needs to have certain capabilities for different categories. But yeah, so as a minimum, they want to know at what rated power factor will it operate. And then we're starting to see some other values, and these are typical values that are applicable to wind turbines and to your asynchronous machines and your thermal or diesel generation machines. These informations will start to become relevant and important, and that's when you would start providing that as well. Something I just picked up, and I want to highlight this. If you are going to install, just pure grid-tied systems without any form of battery, so it's not an alternative supply or hybrid system, you're not too concerned about neutral earth connections, because that's achieved from the utility side, and if the utility is off, the plant is off, so it's not an issue. But as soon as you have some form of alternative supply from your generation, this is something to look out for, is to make sure that you've got a proper neutral earth connection, because it becomes the alternative supply. But this is part of the, standard part of the SANS 10142 Part 1. So that is a value that you would like to capture, make sure that it's in place and you don't have any floating neutrals. If you are going to plan to install transformers so that you're going to step it up to medium voltage, then the information and the parameters in terms of the transformers needs to be captured. And then lastly, just the information about the energy consumption and generation. So they want to know what's the current average consumption per month, what's the average generation that you're expecting from your solar PV plant, and then for future consumption, what do they expect is the consumption going to be from the municipality once this plant has been installed. You'll also see it's asking for the maximum export capacity, because you want to know from a grid impact perspective, how much generation they'll be able to push back into the grid. And then this one is quite an important one in my view. The challenge that we have with these large systems, especially if it's hybrid systems where you're combining solar with diesel generation or solar with batteries or even all three, is that there's no fixed model of how that's going to look like. So it's important that when they apply, they need to indicate and say, okay, but how will this system work? What is the sequence of, first solar, then batteries, then utility, then generator, and when it's switched between, how long is those time periods going to be? So the whole philosophy in terms of operating times, how it's going to do import and export if there's downtime, this needs to be explained here so that you have a better idea of the different scenarios, and from that get also a better idea of how to determine the impact on the grid and obviously identify any possible safety risks. So this is an important part which is coming to the front, which wasn't there before. Okay, so let me quickly just check on the feedback we've got so far. Okay, I think I'm going to conclude first. I'm just looking for time, and then I'll come back to the questions. And then we've got there's something that I've missed. Don't know why I'm seeing it here. Oh yeah, I thought I was missing something. Here we go. Because Leon was going to ask me, where's my answer now? Okay, so if you continue in the file, you'll see if you're going to install storage or hybrids, for hybrid systems, you need to indicate there's no storage, or so you need to tick off which one is applicable, right? So it's yes, there's no storage, or no, there's no storage. Yes, but it will only be used for standby, or yes, connected in parallel, so it can operate with the solar or other forms of generation or the embedded generator, and then standalone. So in other words, it's totally off-grid or on the side. I'm talking about the battery component. So you could still have a embedded generator solar plant, but the battery is operating, totally separate from that. So if it's a 3 or 4, so that's obviously connected in parallel and running with embedded generators, then it's asking the following information. You'll see here it's asking here in terms of the size of the plant and what's the maximum charging rate, because from a utility perspective, and we heard that on our support group, there's a concern with when they need to reinstate the power supply, they can't do that because everybody's inverters are charging. So this becomes a challenge. So it's important to know what's the maximum charging rate, maximum discharging, installed storage capacity in megawatt hours, and then the type of storage technologies. And then it's asking here, what's the combined facility maximum export capacity? So in general, seldomly systems won't be set up to export both solar power and battery. The intention when they installed it was to use it locally. But there's always that possibility that you can have that scenario and set it up for that. So again, you need to indicate that value. And then in terms of the BESS or the battery energy storage systems, as they call it, they want to know, okay, so you're going to install this battery system. What is it going to do? How is it going to work? So again, some form of philosophy. And then in terms of charging the batteries, you want to know, okay, are you going to only charge it with your solar or renewable energy source? Are you only going to use the grid to charge it, almost like a UPS system? Or are you going to use both renewable energy and the grid? And then based on these informations, that's the scenario that will be taken into account for the grid impact study. So obviously, if you're not going to use the grid at all, then it will say, okay, we don't expect a load from the battery energy storage system. But for these scenarios, we need to take into account the maximum load or the maximum charge that the system would need. Okay, so that's the type of information that you would provide, and that would feed into the next process. Now, Leon, you made a point regarding the circuit diagram or line diagram. So here, I don't know if you've missed this or maybe had something different in mind, but you'll see there's two aspects. The one is the layout. So it's a map of the facility showing, where physically the generator will be located on the property. Where's the boundaries? Where's the immediate surrounding properties or locations? The existing point of connection, and then the key electrical infrastructure and how, and any other relevant details. So just a physical view, almost like a Google Earth view showing where's what. But then also it's requiring a preliminary circuit diagram and design. So there, important, showing all major components, proposed point of common coupling, isolating interfacing devices with the municipal electrical network, protection schemes, custom electrical installations, earthing arrangements, and so on. And then if storage is included, they should also show that on the diagram. So this is the type of information that you need to provide. I'm of the view that we can even argue that some of this information should be required for your SECG applications, not just EG. So it is being listed here, and that's something that needs to be submitted with the application when they do apply. And again, compiling these type of circuit diagrams is not just going to be a standard developer. He needs to be really clued up to do this. So again, the question mark regarding considering the PRNG, but it's not always sensible or practical, because not all solar PV companies, have a registered engineer in-house. So whenever they need to pull someone in just to apply, it costs them money. So so it might be that they try to do it internally, but it's again just something to consider from a utility perspective. And then again, the regulatory requirements and standards. These are the key I want to say industry specifications, regulatory aspects, and standards that we are of the view that's applicable for these types of systems. So we've got the NRS 097 series to -2 and -1. We've got the South African grid codes. So in essence, we say that the key standard and regulatory approvals, requirements, and references that the installation needs to comply with are. So in essence, this person that's applying for this application says that when we install the system, we will make sure we comply to these. So if I continue, we've got the renewable power plants grid code, the SANS 10142, we've got the NRS 049, which is about quality of supply, 047 for the quality of service. We've got the code of practice for electricity metering. I think France mentioned that earlier this morning. So if they are going to put in metering, it needs to be installed in a certain way. And then also we've got the ESCOM standard for generator design. And so they need to do a little bit of homework to go back and check what that entails, but this will help to improve the quality and the safety of the installation. Okay, if we continue, you'll see now it's still asking for registering and licensing. So we're actually going to update that. Then we remove the licensing option completely because it's not relevant anymore. And then any other authorizations or clearances or approvals. So we make them aware, Sekia, any environmental, water, heritage, or other authorizations might be necessary. Land rezoning might also be necessary from a municipal perspective, but these are the responsibility of the customer and should be pursued timelessly as not to delay the process. So you throw the ball back into the court, in their court, and say, listen, these are things that you need to sort out and make sure it's in place. We're not going to do it as an electrical department. And there is a guideline that they can go to get some guidance on that. And then we end off on the declaration. So here they just say that all the information that we provide are correct. We're willing to pay the fee. And we, in terms of the budget quote, we have to consider that as well. And then we conclude that you are happy that you supply the information to NERSA, and then has been designed to comply with the relevant standards and requirements. So that's in essence so there's the customer sign off. We've got the applicant sign off. This part that you can see all in yellow, this is what you need to fill in. Your details need to be here so that they know when they complete this form, where to should this form be submitted. And then when they submit the form, they need to make sure that that circuit diagram and the map of the facility is attached as well. Okay, so I want to say in a nutshell, but I think I spend a little bit more time. Let's quickly look at the feedback. Let's quickly check here. Okay, I think Shiraz said, yeah, proposed commissioning date or date of application. I think you're referring to, let me just quickly see, I think it was here, this one, right? Yeah, so it wasn't clear which date that should be. Willing to quickly make a note there. So application or commissioning date. Mark, you could maybe help me here. I think is that just the date of the application, or what was the idea there?
That's the date you're filling in the form. What's today's date?
Okay.
So, and then the proposed construction and commissioning comes later. But I've captured all of these comments for us to, we're going to, after this, we will have learned a lot from all of you, which is great, really appreciating your feedback. And we're going to go through the document and the forms and look at all of these and integrate them and discuss them. So if you want to go over them quickly for her, that's fine. I have captured them in the feedback forms that I've got.
Good. If the points are clear, then let's do it. Let's keep it that way. Unless there's any points that you want to make, maybe just clarify. Otherwise, we can maybe continue with the with the course. So yeah. So Mark, you say all the points raised are clear in terms of what they're proposing.
Not sure about that. Some I'm not in a position to understand, but I have captured them, and we can
at least.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's do that then. If there's something that's not clear, then let's engage maybe afterwards. Sorry, gentlemen, we don't want to. We're definitely going to respond to your questions, and we appreciate the proposals. It's just so that we're sticking within the planned time. So unless there's any burning issues from anyone.
I think lots of sensible suggestions. I don't see a lot of questions there that we should talk about now, that we should respond to, the questions of clarity, etc. A lot of them are just sensible suggestions, which we will we'll look at including.
Perfect. Thank you. Frans, you had your hand up. Hello, Frans.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. The comment that you made that, when the PR engine or competent person must be utilized. I'm just going to refer you back to General Machinery Regulation 2, supervision of machinery. Isn't that the part that we should be using and be looking at to say that if the sum of the power generated by machinery on or in the premises in question and the power derived from other sources, including the generation steam of processes, shall be a person referred to in paragraph B, C, or D as the competent person, and if it's more than 3,000 kilowatt or more, then C and D. And then, I mean, that's maybe something that we need to maybe bring into to say, because it says here that in order to ensure that the provisions of the Act and these regulations in relation to machinery are complied with, an employer or a user of machinery. Now, that user is then obviously the owner or whoever the generation plant will owe them. Then in writing, designate a person in full-time capacity. And that's the person that we need to. So it's basically the GMR 2, but it's in terms of 1, but also in terms of regulation 4.
Yes. No, thank you, Frans. I agree in terms of sign off. You need to have the relevant person for signing off. I think the question was just in the context of the application, physically filling in the application, if it would make sense to require such a person, if it makes sense. So at the point when they do the final design and the detailed work and do the grid impact study, then definitely then they're involved. It's just more on the administrative application part, if it would make sense to have such a person. Then obviously, if it's a yes, then I totally agree. That's a nice way of defining who that should be. Thank you, Frans. That's great. Gerard?
Frans, I would just like to add, I think we should distinguish between the competent people basically attending to the plant and the people who does the design and the sign off. And right at the end, there's a proposal, because we suspect that RETEC is going to be totally overrun at some point. Now, RETEC is the Renewable Energy Technical Evaluation Committee, so they actually are the ones who are supposed to sign off on grid code compliance. And there we also ask for, in essence, a PRN to sign off on everything and confirm that the plant does really meet all the requirements of the grid code. And then we can push that into that pipeline that goes back to RETEC and NERSA without stalling anything happening on the network. So they're definitely different people, and that would probably be, that might still be an independent person from the one who does the design as well, that we refer to in this application.
Great. Okay. No, thank you, Gerard. I have it like that as well, but points taken. Thank you, Frans. Gerard, back to you.
Okay, yes. Now, for step 2, I've got like 100 slides. And I'm joking, not quite that much, but we don't have a lot of time. So hopefully they don't go that slowly. And now you would see that, yes, I've again created a flow chart. And unfortunately, these two are slightly intertwined. So we can't just...
Are you sharing something yet?
Thank you for that. There we go. Okay. So the next 2 steps.
Sorry, yes. I'm stopping you again. Would you mind just quickly showing us again in the guideline where we are now, just so that we can make the link?
Okay, there we go. So firstly, there's in section 1.4 just the different steps. So we're going to look at step 2 and 3 now. Yeah. And you actually find that in chapter 2. Scroll down, scroll down. It starts about here. That's 2.1.1, the application pack that we've discussed. And there's evaluate the application 2.2.
Thank you, Gerard.
Now, what we've already discussed this morning as well is that evaluation and whether you first issue a cost estimate letter or whether you and then a budget quote after that, or whether you just issue one quotation for the customer to be able to do the physical connection. That depends on municipal distributor to distributor. It depends on your requirements, the number of applications that you receive as well as how you deal with the process. So the next flowchart here does actually combine these two into one. You will see there the cost estimate letter is one of the options here, and the budget quote then coming in there. But before that, the actual evaluation is the simulations that will be done. That is dealt with in a different training module. So I'm just looking at it high level overview here. So firstly, if we want to do the grid impact study, we've got the data requirements. And to start off with, just have something that reasonably represent the real network. And yeah, as sort of a side comment to what Fora has also said just now, that data that needs to go into the application form, you don't always have a professional engineer or even pure tech engineer, whoever that's going to, who understands it, who's going to fill in the form. The same on the municipality side or the distributor side. Data is a problem. It's not unique to South Africa. The higher the voltage level, the more available the data is. But even then, very often, it's not all the data. So, but start with what you've got rather than saying, well, I don't have all of it. We can't continue. And rather say, let's improve as we go along. Then the simulation permutations. That also, you want to look at your loading conditions. So typically low and high load, where high load is usually your problem in a traditional network where you only supply customers that use electricity. Then your generation, once again, maximum and minimum. And these, the permutations of these give you the 4 corners, which says that you've got a fairly good idea of what's going to happen on your network. And then you also have to evaluate network contingencies. Then there's a proposal on the acceptable network impact. And the simplest part is that you need to be able to meet all the technical and regulatory requirements. So amongst that is your voltage supply, thermal ratings, these things. I hope the colors in this one actually displays all right. Typically, acceptable network impact, you would look at the steady state conditions of your network, and that's both voltage regulation at all your customer nodes, as well as thermal loading. I say customer nodes because that is actually where you are regulated by your license conditions. Other nodes in the network where customers aren't connected, you don't have a regulatory requirement, but your own equipment might also be impacted, so you might want to look at it. Then fault levels, make sure your protection is correctly set up, coordinated, and you've got adequate equipment ratings and withstand capabilities of your protection. What's the impact on your neighboring customers? Okay, then voltage changes. And this is some place where there's usually a very big debate. But this gives you ultimately an indication of the strength of the network relative to the customer that connects. And what is the potential, in other words, what's the potential impact of this generator on your network? So based on international documents and guidelines, we say at low voltage, for each generator, you don't want more than 1% voltage change. When do we have that voltage change? That's when the generator, for instance, generates at full capacity and trips off, and the instantaneous voltage change there. That is what we're looking at here. So there's no time for tap changes to respond or any other voltage control mechanism to fix the voltage again. You want to see what happens instantaneously because that tells you that relative strength between the two. For medium voltage, sorry, that's a typo, not megawatt. Medium voltage, urban and rural, 1% and 3% respectively. So urban, we typically have very strong networks, and you might also have more customers connecting. That's why that limit is a little bit lower. Rural, fewer customers, further away, you can go up to probably 3%, higher voltages 3%. And then if it's dispatchable, in other words, there's some form of control over it, you can go over to a slightly higher percentage change. This is also in line with international policies, that it means that if the net or the generator starts to affect your network, you at least can ask it to change some of its the output or the reactive power easier than for a non-dispatched generator. Then that's for network normal. Under contingencies, that's a little bit more. And then feedback. The feedback, this is up into your higher voltage part of your network. For low voltage transformers, the recommendation is similar to the NRA 097-2-3, that you stick to 75% of the transformer rating. There are two main reasons for this. The first is that an inverter always has some DC offset in the current or voltage. And this can cause damage to the transformers, so we never want to take it up to full capacity. That is based on some discussions also with the Eskom transformer manufacturers, and I think the municipalities use very similar transformer specs because that's also NRS and SAB specifications, as well as limiting the impact of harmonics. At this point, I would rather say that keep it in mind in your internal policies that you start discussing with the suppliers of the transformers. What's the impact of harmonics? What can these transformers actually withstand? Because that wasn't part of the original specifications, the transformers aren't designed for it. So that is what you want to open up the discussion with your supplier, as well as just limit the impact a little bit at low voltage. By the time you get to medium voltage connections, those sort of become less important. Why? Well, there would be a transformer stepping up from a low voltage where the generation occurs up to the medium voltage where it connects to your network. So the DC would already be blocked by that transformer, which in this case would belong to the customer. So it's not the distributor's concern anymore. Harmonics, if you connect at medium voltage, probably also mostly filtered at the low voltage transformers, or you have better emission limits, which will reduce that impact. But once again, it's a good idea to discuss that with the transformer supplier. All right, so now we've basically looked at the initial aspects. So we can now go and do the grid impact study. So firstly, wants to talk about a simplified connection criteria, and that's something that everybody is afraid with based on the 097-2-3, because that's a simplified connection criteria. If you've done a hosting capacity study, you would know where in your network you can connect generators easily without expected negative impacts. Then it's a simple connection process. Now, I think very few distributors have this information already. So you would actually just say, no, we don't pass it. So now you have to do the detailed grid, do a proper grid impact study. Once you've done this, it'll either pass or not. If it passes, which means that it meets all this acceptable network impact criteria. So, okay, let's do a cost estimate letter. That's easy now. You probably have to change some of the protection. You have to install a new meter. So that's a simple requirement. If it doesn't pass all of these acceptable network impacts, I would say evaluate the strengthening options. Don't do any real studies yet. If you know the voltage change is just a little bit too high, maybe increase the conductor size. Or just say, okay, I am going to exchange the transformer for a larger one because that will strengthen my network sufficiently. So your planners would have an idea of what one can do at this point and say, okay, I've got these options. Let's see what that's going to cost. And that would typically then go into a cost estimate letter. So the idea is that this cost estimate letter can be done relatively quickly without investing too much time in this process. Okay, along with this, we need to look at the other departments, so your protection, your power quality and maintenance. Are all of these requirements met? There's the estimate upgrades. I don't have a lot about the protection and the maintenance right now, but the power quality, that becomes, well, that is the distributor's responsibility because they have to maintain the power quality in their network. So in terms of the grid code, you have to give historical data to the customer. If that is not available, you will give him, you just refer him to NRA 048 because that is applicable for our entire country. It's a good idea to install a power quality recorder. If it's smaller than 5 megawatt, just advise the generator of the grid code requirement and that they have to measure, it's their responsibility to measure the power quality and confirm that they meet the requirements. Larger, it's recommended that they do install a permanent recorder as part of the design and installation process. Right. The next step is that you as a distributor, as part of your task of managing the power quality, have to tell the customer, this is what you are allowed to do to the network. That's called apportioning. Now, if it's smaller than 5 megawatt, yeah, that's sign is the wrong way around. So it's smaller than 5 megawatt. You can just refer to other standards and have them type tested. So similar to there is the 097-2-1 again, and the grid code would deem them compliant to the requirements. If it's larger than 5 megawatt, then you go for the full apportioning to tell them what they're allowed to emit. That must go into the draft QOSA. But just very quickly, apportioning would be basically slicing the cake. So compatibility level, that is what NRS 048.2 tells us what the network should be at. Then there should be a planning level, which is slightly less. That's what you aim for, so that there's a little bit of fat left in case something happens. This gets split between, and in a distributor network, typically you would have an upstream network of a transformer and then a downstream network. So you have what comes from Eskom side and what comes from your customer's side. This part here gets sliced further between the different customers. And the latest document basically says that you slice this evenly for all possible customers. So you leave a slice for future customers as well. There are different philosophies, which one will address in a different course later in the year, and we go into this in more detail. So for the smaller generators, we just basically reference, this comes from 048 Part 4, which can be included in the connection agreement, and then the 097-2-1 and IEC 61000-3-3 or 5. Those are specifically for the flicker compliance. Okay, so once you've done this, you've got a good idea of what the impacts are in terms of protection that needs to be upgraded or changed. Maintenance, what's the impact going to be on the maintenance on your network? You've done the power quality aspects. Now you can issue a cost estimate letter. That would be the end of the formal step 2 as proposed here. So just to summarize that, grid impact study, short circuit studies, protection coordination, quality of supply, maintenance implications, assess your metering implications, and issue the cost estimate. Now, the customer will accept the cost estimate letter or maybe ask for alternative options. Look at what could maybe be a more economic solution. The customer also have to acknowledge what those protection and power quality parameters and the implications are. Now, the next thing is that I know there are a few people in various municipalities who have a keen interest in this, definitely can do these studies. But the majority of municipalities don't have the resources, the software available, or even the know-how how to do this. So there are options that you can say, well, let's appoint a consultant who will do this on our behalf. This is already done with planning studies in many cases. That's one option. Or you can tell the customer, listen, you get a consultant to do these studies. The problem is that, like I said earlier, paper is very willing and patient. It's easy for anybody to write anything down and somebody needs to check it. So once again, if you have the professionally registered person, they have the code of ethics that they need to work towards. So hopefully they will not mislead you when they give these results. So the options are either you do it yourself, you appoint a consultant, or you ask the customer to use either their own consultant or even a recommended consultant to do these studies. Right. Okay, this reserving capacity, I think there's not really time right now to discuss it much more. Other considerations, I think that's from an operational point of view. Load shedding, can you exclude them from load shedding because they actually assist the network? What's the grid availability? PPAs typically have penalty clauses in there, and you pay the generator for energy that it can't sell because your network's not available. Ramp rates, that could have an effect on both your network stability, but if they can supply it, it can actually increase network stability by starting to act like a synchronous machine. Battery charging, that is also, if they can be limited, you reduce the potential impact on your network when they charge the batteries from the network. I think Forrest also mentioned that just now. Network variations, I think this is a good thing to keep in mind, or network operations. In which cases do you maybe have to ask this generator to reduce power output or change the reactive power? So the network ops people also need to look at that impact on the network for different contingencies, very specifically. And then for step 2, which has actually been quite a lot of work now, so has a grid impact study been done? And you will also have to evaluate it. So either if you've got somebody that you can really trust, it's your own consultant, then you can tick it off. Otherwise, you have to review the reports and say whether you agree. Has the other studies and checks and stuff been done? Yes. Have you issued the cost estimate letter, and has the customer accepted that? Now, typically with a cost estimate letter, there's once again an invoice. If you accept the cost estimate, well, okay, the budget quote to get that is going to cost you this much. So there's also a budget quote fee before you even do the extra set of work. Okay, so 1 or 2 questions, anything burning questions?
Maybe
So, Gerard,
yes.
talk about the accuracy of the cost estimate letter and why it should be different to the budget quote.
Okay, thank you, Mark. That is important, yes. Let me just pull up this one somewhere. If you, at this point, you only evaluate potential strengthening options. So you're not doing any detail. And you're only going to say, oh, I think I need a bigger transformer. I think I need another line or something like that. I know I need a new meter, this. And I just plonk it all into, sum them all together in a list in Excel. So, well, this is the estimate. So that's really, it's a rough estimation. And in the Eskom case, it's non-binding, nothing at all. The budget quote is where you put the effort in to get that accurate, because then now you know the customer is probably going to go through with this. You're not wasting your time. So at this point, the idea is to spend as little time as possible to get something that is with information at hand as accurate as possible. It's only when you get to the budget quote, and in the Eskom case, they call it an 85% confidence, which means the final costs could be 15% higher or lower than in the budget quote. So I will definitely recommend this for people who expect a lot of applications, just to allow things to flow, because once you get to the cost estimate letter, at least the customer's got something and he can continue with his feasibility studies on his side. Whereas if you always have to go to the budget quote, that's going to take longer and the customers are going to be more upset. But you have to make sure that this is non-binding. It's really meant for feasibility. If you don't get a lot of these applications, you can probably go straight to the budget quote. Sorry, another question.
Yeah, no, so there's actually then 3 fees / quotes or invoices. The one is the application fee, and then there's a cost estimate letter, and then there's a budget quote. And they all have a specific role. The application fee is you pay that up front for you to initiate the process. The cost estimate letter is just to give them a high-level cost, almost want to say thumbs up, but a high-level costing without doing detailed investigation. And the budget quote will be based on a detailed investigation.
Yes, plus a detailed design. So design would be actually, well, it's not the full detailed design, but they would become involved in this stage because they've got the experience in what does it cost to actually build a new transformer or install it, etc. Now the cost estimate, Shiraz, there can be a fee to continue with the next process. That is how the Eskom process works. So it's not compulsory, but of course you can add that.
Sorry, Gerard, okay. I just wanted to add, obviously Gerard went through and over the grid impact study section very superficially. And the reason for that is because the grid impact study and everything done in that environment will be covered in a different course. Has been covered and will be covered. So for more details on that, that will come.
Okay, now we are running into the quiz time already, but I think this does connect very well. We have discussed about most of this, and actually we've discussed the fact that once the customer accepts the cost estimate and he pays the quotation application fee, then you will go to do the network strengthening study, which is the full grid impact study. And you will see exactly, okay, along with this transformer, I actually need this and this and this protection. I might need to install that and that. And all of that also included comparing the alternatives before you issue the budget quote. Once again, this can also be done by the consultant. And at this point, it's also the customer's consultant. And it's at this point as well that they can say, but I'm going to go for the self-built option because I've now done my homework. I know what needs to be done. And they can get their own budget quote, so to speak. Just remember that the design that we're discussing tomorrow still needs to be signed off by your technical evaluation committees. They can't just sign it off themselves. Okay. Next. So yes, from the evaluation here, the distributor now issues the budget quote fee invoice to the customer. So that is payment to proceed to the next step. Then he undertakes or outsources the detailed grid strengthening study, if it's necessary, and issues the budget quote. Now, I just want to step back here. Let's assume that at this point you saw that there's actually not much required to be done to the network. They can connect. If that's your process, you will still issue the cost estimate letter. Customer will come back and pay that budget quotation fee so that he gets the next step. In that case, the difference between the cost estimate and the budget quote is probably going to be not very big, and there's not going to be any questions or issues. I do know, especially with Eskom, there are times when this budget quote is like 3-4 times as much as the original cost estimate because of that capacity that couldn't be kept while they were considering their options. So that has caused some unhappiness. So your disclaimer that this is non-binding. What is your network capacity process? Do you keep it? At which point do you keep it? That's very important. Okay, that's just the list of outputs. I think we've discussed all of it, and that's in the document. And once again, there is a checklist. Has a great strengthening study been done? Of course, if it's not necessary because the customer could connect in the first place, that's not applicable. Just say why. Your internal departments, planning, protection, power quality, maintenance, other departments, has their concerns been addressed? Are they aware of anything that's going to happen in the network? Is that being addressed? Then you can issue the budget quote, and the customer has to, again, now accept that. And only once he's accepted that in terms of the Eskom process, if I remember correctly, does their capacity keep reserved for them. So until they accepted that budget quote, that capacity can go to anybody. All right, and this letter of consent, because we'll have to just confirm that with the registration requirements.
If they are wheeling, if they want to wheel, they will still need a letter of consent because they have to register with NERSA. So that still applies in those cases.
Yes, thank you, Mark. All right. Just, summary. We've got 3 steps that we've looked at: application, evaluation, and detailed evaluation. All the way getting to the budget quote, and we've discussed the fees. So I think we can go to an example, unless there's any burning questions right now.
Gerard, you maybe would just want to show quickly step 3 in the document.
And there's a question from John in the chat, which would be useful to address.
Okay. Get my mouse. That was step 2. We discuss basically protection and maintenance as well, along with the power quality aspects. The cost estimate letter. And then you get to the budget quote, which is actually the grid strengthening studies. Section 2.3. Then we've got the list of outputs that we've already discussed as well. Right. Mark, you say there's a question from John. Can we provide the application fee cost estimate letter based on historical data? In my opinion, one should be able to do that, yes. We do have a list of approximate fees or costs that is part of this guideline that can also be used, especially because the idea is not to spend a lot of time at this stage. Okay, Becky has also said that on the cost estimate letter, you should say that, yeah, so you say it's non-binding and that the next quotation would be 85% or more accurate. So that's always good to add that kind of disclaimer. Thanks, John.
Okay, Gerard, I know the quiz is one of the activities. We also planned applying that checklist to an example.
Yeah, I sent you example 2. Did you get that one?
Yes, I did. Okay. So are we going? I'm just thinking now in terms of time, because the quiz they can always do it at their own pace afterwards. But I think it is important and valuable if we could apply that checklist to some of the examples or portions thereof.
So you've got the Google link for the checklist?
I do.
Okay.
So I can send that out.
I'm going to pull up the application form.
I maybe just want to quickly show how it's going to work. I'm just going to switch screens.
Okay. Sure.
Do this quickly. Okay, so you're going to receive this Google form. Let's switch on my camera. There we go. Okay, so you're going to receive this Google form. You're going to provide your details, email address. And then you'll see with the blocks which Gerard showed you in terms of the checklist is now in a Google form format. So it's again, customer center filled in information pack forms and application fee invoice, application received and complete, application fee paid. So there you just need to indicate if it's yes or not applicable. And then at the bottom, there's a section for any comments that you want to make based on what you see of the information that's provided. And it's the same for step 2. With some comments, and it's the same for step 3. So yeah, it's literally just that what Gerard showed on the screen, which you apply, and the checklist helps you to say, okay, I've checked that this is done, I've checked that it's in place, or we've done this action if it's applicable to you. So for example, budget quote issue, that's something that you would need to do. And you can tick it off to see, okay, we're progressing and we're getting there to submit. Okay, so that's how that will work. So I'll send this link, and then Gerard, over to you.
All right. Just going to do it like this.
Okay, the link has been sent on MS Teams and Google, and on WhatsApp. Please let me know if there's someone that does not have it.
Let me, in the document, someone go to the checklist. See, there's the indicative costs for 2022. And there's our checklist. So firstly, we are going to say, let's look at the application form. Is everybody ready with the checklist? Maybe I should ask, can everybody see my screen?
Yeah, can see it. It's good.
Okay. All right, so firstly, this is not a full application. It is a little bit made up, but the idea is to just look through it again yourselves. Now, could you share this on the website or not yet?
Are you talking about the document? You want us to share that with the people?
No, that can wait if it's not done. I just wondered.
No, I haven't been not uploaded yet. Sorry.
Okay. So here we get to the actual generator information. So the first question that we do want to answer is, well, did the customer get the information pack, and did he complete the application form and pay the application? Well, sorry. No, this one, sorry, is customer was sent the full information pack. There's also a typing error there, sorry. And has he received all of that? So who does this depend on? If this depends on the customer, well, he's come to ask for it. So actually it depends on you as the distributor. So would you say, if he's got this application form, if you've got your processes in place, did he get the full information pack? So that would be the first question. Or you can see the progress.
So it's not instantaneous. I think once everybody submitted, we will see. So just to make sure everybody understands what's going to happen, you are going to answer the Google form according to your understanding, right? So you're going to tick it off yes or not applicable as we go along, and then afterwards we'll look at everybody's responses, which will be tomorrow. If I got it right, or now actually. So let's finish it. Yeah. Finish this, and then the quiz we can review tomorrow.
Okay, then.
Am I correct in saying that what we have is we are now at a particular stage in the process? We have received an application form.
Yes.
And you are just sort of stepping us through all of what you have talked about today. We need to look at the application form and then go through the checklist and see how that works.
Yes, so the checklist is the application and the evaluate application. That's the first 3 steps. And I've got an application form open here of a, unfortunately, fictitious customer at this point. You'll get the real case study on Friday. So there's an application form. This is where you start with the generator overview information. And for now, I'll just scroll through here. He's got a name. There's a date that he completed this. There's a capacity of the new generator. So yes, this is a serious installation. He's got some generation. It says there's a solar PV. And he's only going to do this. There's no excess power to be exported to the municipality. So one will have to now, you can do some sanity checks here already, but I'll share this and you can look at it later. Okay, ground mounted PV plant with a lot of inverters and a lot of inverters for a battery energy storage system. So this starts to link back to the no excess power to be exported, because they're going to basically balance their load. Farm or property information, it's their coordinates. Well, it's the owner. So you might ask him for a copy of the title deed if he is the owner. Then just further information so that you can get hold of them. There's also the question that was raised earlier, anticipated construction start date. So you will see they expected it to be 2 weeks after they handed in this application. But it's good to have people who are optimistic. And then they did realize it might take quite some time to build a plant of this size. The existing NMD is about 40 MVA at 22 kV. Then So what voltages are they going to connect? And many of these inverters have transformers already, so you get them as a unit. And then what's the estimated fault contribution? That's all there. There's the manufacturer, it's PV. What are the inverters, MVA and megawatt range? PV installed, voltages, rated power factor. Now he's basically completed most of it so far, but here's a bunch of open blocks. Is that a concern? You have to decide that now. There's also transformer specifications. That's all empty. Then he's given his own consumption and generation levels. Maybe like Fora has explained, this is probably not enough information. And you will go back to him to find out, is he ever going to charge that battery from the network or not? All right. Okay, so storage. This wasn't completed at all. And he's just randomly ticked a few of these, it almost seems. You see, it doesn't need to be registered or licensed. All right. And no, we don't have the circuit diagram or the map here. But I think in practice, you would expect to find that. So if we go back to the checklist, if you want to do that first section now, did the customer receive the full information pack, forms and application fee invoice? Do you think yes or not applicable? Well, it is applicable. And did he receive it? Then was the application received and is it complete? Well, in our case, it's not 100% complete. So you are going to send back the customer until he completes it. And then I would say you can tick this one. And the same with the application fee paid. Once you've got it, that's an easy one to tick. Okay, so you should have the Google form that you can open next to your presentation. That's maybe help.
Yeah, Gerard, I'm just realizing as the form is, so for example, they could have said no, the application which is received is not complete, right? But obviously, I know even with the COC, you never can say no. It should be yes or not applicable. So it means that you have to go through another iteration, like you've mentioned, of sending it back, get it complete, and then you can tick it off. So it guides you to say, okay, we tick it off. So I think for the purpose of the exercise, because I see there's a lot that already indicated and not applicable as no, is either we can add the no option or we can just indicate not applicable. Yeah, but it's going to get confusing, because it's not always not applicable. It's a no as well. So I see some of the people are still busy. Let me just quickly check. Yeah, I see there's people that in the comment section they've indicated that if it's a yes or a no, or why in the comments. So I think let's just pick that up in the comment section. So that's fine. Okay. Do you want me to share the screen or the responses yet? You want to check that first section for now? I see we've got, because the challenge is they need to complete the full list before we can see. That's the challenge. Yeah.
All right. Now, I've only got the executive summary of the report here. Or I've extracted that. Where is that one now? Okay. So we've got this application form. So one thing is, of course, you will check against the application form that they now come and install what they said they were going to install or not. So in this case, it's just the executive summary because that contains the essence of what was found. They tell you they've got, in this case, 44 megawatts of PV and 40 megawatts of BESS for the one system, and 48 megawatt MVA max load and minimum load. That's the information from the customer that they have received. And just in the conclusions, okay, there's some derating of the inverters, something that people don't often think of is that inverters, let's say in this case, they are 4.4 megawatt each, but that's at 20 degrees Celsius. And they do speak, if you go up to 50 degrees Celsius operating point, they actually drop down to quite a bit less. So in this case, just below 40 MVA or 4 MVA per inverter. Or group of inverters, okay. And, sorry. But so in this case, you can see that the application was probably also not complete. I'm sorry, that I thought I fixed. So that talks about the derating, and in the end, that tell the customer that they couldn't actually generate what they planned to generate. So this study gives you load flow results, indicates acceptable performance of the planned system. The voltage regulation appears to be within plus minus 10% at all bus bars, and at the inverter terminals plus 15 minus 20%. And that's typically within inverter tolerances, so that's not an issue. They've seen overloading of equipment when they use the maximum load case, so when load is already at the maximum point and you want to charge your battery energy storage at the same system at the same time. This was now subsequently confirmed with the customer. It isn't a sensible thing to do because typically you install batteries to reduce the maximum demand. So that case won't occur. Speaking of the tap changer on the substation, short circuit levels. Sorry?
I think someone unmuted by accident. Continue.
Okay. And they talk about the short circuit levels at the inverter terminals. And yeah. So if we go back to the evaluation, well, this is the load flow study. So was that a grid impact study? You have to decide that. We don't do a detailed analysis, which is why I only gave you the executive summary. Was other studies done? Well, short circuit was done. We don't know about the quality of supply. That's not in here. Obviously, from your side as the distributor, have you done the apportioning? These should be separate ones. And based on this, you're going to issue a cost estimate letter. That once again is the distributor's responsibility. And the customer would come back and say they accept it and pay the fee for the next stage, the budget quote stage. All right, so that is the step 2 in your Google Forms. You did set it up that way, Nafora.
Yes, it's called step 2, phase 1. It should be section 1 actually, but yeah, the split. It stops at cost estimate letter accepted.
Okay, sorry, just again, when we put this together, that no option, we didn't add because you don't want it. If in the checklist, you never want to say no, because then you just kick it back. So this checklist is really at the end. And as you continue, say, yes, this is done. If the application hasn't been received, you just don't mark anything until it is received. If the fee isn't paid, you don't mark anything until it's paid. So it just stops there. And that's why there's no option. Otherwise, you can get a tick mark and you look quickly and, oh, everything's been ticked. It's okay. So you rather want to say it's either yes or not applicable with appropriate comments.
Yeah, so I think for the purpose of the exercise, the online exercise, it would have been good to have a yes, no, or yes, not applicable, no. But in reality, it's always going to be, yes, not applicable, yes, not applicable. You'll never have a no option. So just to understand the difference.
Okay. So
we're actually now sitting at 4 o'clock.
I know.
Yeah. So and I know there's a few people that maybe planned a few things, but it would be good. I don't know the last section.
Basically, need. Speaking about this overloading, which I've now said, okay, overloading of equipment seen when you've got maximum load and the battery energy storage system is charging. So that might point you to the grid strengthening study. I don't have the results of something like that here, but assume you've received that, and that says whatever is necessary can be done. Of course, internal department sign off, that's the distributor's responsibility. And I think for the purposes of this exercise, just say you have spoken to everybody, but take note of who you marked down. Planning, protection, power quality, maintenance. Is there anybody else who needed to be involved in this? And then once you've done all of this, so you've now marked everything yes in the actual scenario, then you can issue the budget quote, and the customer then has to accept that budget quote before you continue with anything else. All right. So if you want to finish that Google form quickly.
Yeah, I think the comment sections is good. There you can see how people are interpreting, what's according to them correct or not, or missing. And Gerard, just one question, that grid strengthening, you said that it's supplied by the developer. Isn't that supplied or done by the utility?
Yes, that would be the distributor.
Yes.
Unless if you outsource it.
Oh yeah, obviously.
So that's also all those different options.
Okay, so I see the responses are coming through. So let's work with what we've got purely because of time. Everybody can still, when they've got time, they can finalize. So let's see here. So in terms of the application, I think most people said, the info pack has been sent. So that's why they've completed the form. But you can see there's a lot that's saying it's not complete. They've received it, but it's not complete. And I think that was also the comments, application incomplete. So that's true. And then obviously fictitiously they've applied the application fee that typically goes with the info pack. So those go hand in hand. But the question is, have we received the payment? That's the question. So there you would need to engage your financial department to say, okay, we've received the payment. Okay, so that was step one. Let's just look at the comments. We've got here bidirectional meter required. I don't think this is something that would be part of this step, is it, Gerard? This will come later with the budget quote, or even the cost estimate letter.
You should add that in the cost estimate later as well, because you know you're going to need it.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not part of the application fee. It's not part of step one that you really need to look at the metering.
Yes, correct.
Okay, they would just say not applicable as no, application 100% complete. That's good. Need the information. Okay, finance has confirmed payment. That's great. A municipality customer does not require pay application fee. Okay, so that's why you said not applicable, I foresee. Okay, that's good. Application not completed, missing information, form not completed, applicant to complete blanks, elaborate the supply and base, applicant to submit needs single line diagrams in images. Okay, so obviously this is not part of step one, but I agree, this is true. So that would be in the next step. Incomplete, sorry about that, that's Google doing it. Pay receive, send back to customer, grid study network evaluation, application not completed. Okay, it repeats itself. Okay, not applicable meaning the information is not received. No, so in general, just to make sure we're all on the same page, in reality, if we look at the questions, it will always be, I've added no quickly just to test it, but it should always be in reality the non-applicable. But for this exercise, it should have been no, just so that we could get some feedback from the audience. So because if it's not there, you need to get it or request that they provide it.
Yeah, that's part of the exercise, actually leaving these gaps so that you can see that there's a lot of stuff that's been completed, but it still isn't everything.
Yeah.
Customers often do that.
Now we'll see on Friday to what extent we've got that situation. And then I'll put in a no column to see what's missing. If we look at the rest, if we look at step 2, which is evaluating the application, so obviously there's some form of GridNet impact study done. Other necessary studies undertaken, there's some of that there. Cost estimate letter issued, and then the cost estimate letter accepted. So this is something that you would do, and then we need to have some form of confirmation from that. And this would typically be an email to say, we accept the letter, or they sign the letter and send it back. Let's just see what's the feedback. Not sure if it's designing to be done. Maybe designing. Let's just quickly see. There's a question, does it mean won't have the limit of feeding back to the grid? Not sure about that question. Yeah, so obviously I agree with this. You need more information to evaluate. Okay, grid code compliance confirmed all of the above. Okay, there needs a grid impact study. Yeah, we need quality of supply. Okay, so there's a lot of information that's not there. Okay.
Okay, interesting that that there's somebody who speaks about the grid code compliance, because this report that I've shared is actually a grid code compliance. There's nothing about the distributor network and how that was modeled. There's nothing about the impact on the distributor network. So once again, that was meant just to add a little bit of a catch so that you think about this. What we've seen most of the time with where we've assisted municipalities is that the consultants submit either just a grid code compliance report and call it a grid impact study, or it's some kind of mixture between the two. And with the training that started last year on how to actually do these grid impact studies, I would hope that even the consultants would start doing better jobs to give the correct simulation results to the distributors. But this one was not actually a grid impact assessment. It looks at the impact of the customer's network, but not on the distributor's network.
Okay, so that's, Gerard, can I continue to the next one?
Yes.
Or the last
Please.
one. So here again, we can see in most cases people said yes. Let's just quickly see grid net impact. Yeah, that's the same as before. The network strengthening study. We have planning sign-off. We've got protection sign-off. We've got power quality sign-off, maintenance sign-off. So obviously all of these sign-offs is an internal process. It means that internally you've submitted or provided the application form to the relevant department. And it might be that those who said not applicable are those who don't have some of these departments. Are there any other studies undertaken? I think, Gerard, you made a valid point. It would make sense to break these down so that you could check each one of them individually, because it's, you know, it could be halfway yes, halfway no, and then it's a no. So budget quote issued, been accepted, and, you know, the letter of consent. Most people said not applicable, which is true because this person is not going to wheel. So it falls away. I think that's what they say. So let's see what feedback we get. Okay, so we've got here. Okay, yeah, so obviously you still need more information. Okay, that's clear.
Okay, the SCADA design also needs to be signed off at this point, Shiraz.
See. So that's a question, Gerard. You asking the SCADA?
Yeah, Shiraz has typed a question. What about SCADA integration? That we don't have on here.
So just so that we can see the steps together. So there are the steps. This is now this section here. Yeah, it would make sense to have it somewhere here. For you to issue the budget quote, I mean, obviously on the developer side, they need to have their own SCADA capabilities. But on the utility side, making provision for SCADA. Isn't the SCADA capabilities and the control only checked later on with the grid code compliance?
Yes, but yeah, if you need anything on the distributor side, you need to check it now. It will at least be aware of it. That needs to be included in your budget, your quotes there.
It might be that, I'm not sure if it's under planning, but it might be that you under other, you've got like operational staff, or, you know, what's the word? The operator, you could say. And
but I think
maybe, yeah,
we can just expand this part of the list with these recommendations. And just a different comment to us is that very few municipalities have SCADA. So that is one of those big questions.
George Lotte asking the question about finance department signing off as well. Getting their buy-in. I mean, you can always add it there. If there's internal costs that they need to approve.
Well, they'll probably sign the budget quote. But yes, let's discuss that, George. Who would sign it on your side?
You mean like submitting the invoice, a quote, or making it, providing it?
Somewhere they would have a say.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, let's just keep track of these comments as well, like marked it earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, it's 4:15. So if you want to put that quiz forward, we have allowed time tomorrow morning to also look at the quiz and discuss more questions.
Yeah. So just quickly do that. So the quiz questions.
I am capturing the comments. So I've got a long list of comments and suggestions, which is great.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay. I'm going to send. It's a quiz. It's a multiple choice quiz. So it should be, you know, straightforward and easy to submit. Just want to make sure it's the right one before I resend. Yeah, there we go. So it's all multiple choice. I'll send it on the WhatsApp and on MS Teams. Just want to submit quickly.
So now I think you can stop the recording.
Okay.